What's going on? This is Theo Gremminger, and I'm dropping my 2024 rookie wide receiver rankings. I'm going to give you top 10 overall and a couple of bonuses because I had to have some ties at 10 because this is a really, really tough class to rank. I believe that this class is special, and this class is loaded with players that are ready to contribute right away at the NFL level. This class is also going to have NFL draft pick equity. I think we're going to see 3 wide receivers selected in the top 10 overall, and there's a good chance that we could see 3 wide receivers selected in the top 6 overall picks in the NFL draft. We've seen so much success recently from rookie wide receivers. In 3 out of the last 4 seasons, we've had rookie wide receivers putting up top 6 PPR numbers. Talking about Puka Nacua last year in 2023. We're talking about Jamar Chase in 2021. And we're talking about Justin Jefferson in 2020. And that's not even counting players like Jalen Waddle, players like Tank Dell that came in and were incredible for fantasy. So rookie wide receivers are not only impactful for dynasty managers, but they're also impactful for redraft managers. These kind of players are coming in and immediately putting up wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 numbers, and a bunch of them wide receiver 3 numbers. We have never seen a rookie wide receiver finish as wide receiver 1 overall, but I believe in the future that is coming. Could it come from this class? I don't think so, but it's absolutely possible if these players land correctly. The underdog market, early best ball rankings are already showing us that this class is getting steamed up. Marvin Harrison Jr. is being selected as a wide receiver 1 already, and Malik Nabers is going inside of round 3. So this class is steaming right now. And I'm going to drop my rankings, and I'm really excited about these guys. I also think there's a chance that we see this class challenge for the record for most wide receivers selected in round 1 of the NFL draft. The record is 7. Could we have 8 wide receivers selected in round 1? I'm not sure. It's a big ask, but I think we're going to be close this year. And when you're talking about the wide receiver class for 2024, you have to start at the top. And my number 1 player is Marvin Harrison Jr. And when we start talking about Marvin Harrison Jr., we don't need to talk about where he ranks in terms of the rookie class. In single QB leagues, as good as my number 2 wide receiver is, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be the 101 in pretty much every single rookie draft that there is. He'll even go number 1 in some super flex drafts. And that's including Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May. Marvin Harrison Jr. has a chance to go 101 in every single format. And the question with Marvin Harrison Jr. is not where he goes in the rookie class. It's where does he go in dynasty startups at the wide receiver position. I don't think he's going to leap Justin Jefferson. I don't think he's going to leap Jamar Chase. And I don't think he's going to leap CeeDee Lamb. But I do think Marvin Harrison Jr. versus Amon-Ra St. Brown is absolutely a question. And I think he will be selected ahead of A.J. Brown, ahead of Garrett Wilson, ahead of name your favorite next wide receiver. He's that good. He's as exciting a wide receiver prospect as we have ever seen at this stage of the draft process. He's dynamic. He's got exceptional hands, an incredible catch radius, and he's got the ability to dominate in the red zone. If he lands correctly, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to eat in the red zone. And names like Calvin Johnson, A.J. Green, Julio Jones, these names are casually mentioned when searching for a player to compare to Marvin Harrison Jr. And you talk about athleticism. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to tear up the NFL draft combine. This is a guy that made Bruce Feldman's Freaks list, which talks about the greatest athletes in college football. He has legendary bench press numbers. Wide receivers don't even test right now. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably the strongest pound for pound wide receiver in this class. And if that were not enough, his father was an 8-time Pro Bowler and caught the second most passes in NFL history. So, like, lineage, all that good stuff, all on Marvin Harrison Jr.'s side. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is not the only reason to get excited about this class. This class is nasty. The top end talent at the wide receiver spot is incredible here. And when we're talking about the wide receiver 2 in this class, this player would be the wide receiver 1 almost any other year. He would have been the wide receiver 1 last year, and he would have probably been the wide receiver 1 in 2022 in the Garrett Wilson class. We've already seen how good Garrett Wilson is, and I think this player is better at this stage, and that's Malik Nabers. Nabers is my number 2 wide receiver, and he's also my number 2 overall in single QB rankings. He's 20 years old. So Harrison Jr. is 21, but Malik Nabers is even younger. He's 20. He'd be the number 1 wide receiver in many classes historically. He can line up anywhere and win. He's a great route runner, and he always finds himself open. When you watch him on film, the first thing that stands out is explosiveness. LSU has been an NFL factory. Guys like Odell Beckham, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, all came through Baton Rouge and LSU. But when you open up the record books, you're going to find Malik Nabers at the very top of LSU stat history in terms of receiving yards and receptions. Killed it. And he averaged an absurd 17.6 yards per reception this past season. In single QB leagues, this is about as valuable as it gets for a 102. There is a chance that Malik Nabers outscores Marvin Harrison Jr. not only in his rookie season, but over the course of the next few seasons. I would bet on Marvin Harrison Jr. being the wide receiver 1 that comes out of this class when we go a couple years in the future. But there is a chance that Malik Nabers scores just as many fantasy points. It's a lot easier to trade up for the 102 than it is the 101 right now, and you're going to get similar type results, at least in year 1. Paint you a scenario right now. Malik Nabers gets drafted at the 104 to Arizona, gets attached to Kyler Murray. He goes nuts. Malik Nabers gets drafted to the LA Chargers, gets attached to Justin Herbert, goes nuts. How about Malik Nabers, a sneaky spot for him, the New York Giants, who need an offensive identity, and Brian Daboll needs a player that he can heavily target in that offense. Think about Stephon Diggs, how many targets he got with Brian Daboll. All 3 of those landing spot scenarios are there for Malik Nabers. I think he's going to absolutely crush it his rookie season. And I love the wide receiver 3 in this class. My wide receiver 3 in this class is Rome Odounze. And Rome Odounze is 21 years old. So all 3 of these guys are young at the top. And Rome Odounze has incredible size, speed combination. He had a track background in high school, was a big-time track athlete. Rome Odounze was the best fantasy producer in college at the wide receiver spot this past season. He's going to hear his name called early in round 1. And like I said, I think he's going to go in the top 10 picks. There's a chance that he falls a little bit, but he's insulated. Let's call his floor like the 112. I think his ceiling is the 106. He's going to go somewhere in that range. Great size, great speed, and it shows on the field. Led all college wide receivers in PPR fantasy points per game this season, and Washington was undefeated throughout the year, won that big playoff matchup against Texas, won 2 games against the Oregon Ducks, and Washington makes it to the national championship game, loses to Michigan, but Odounze didn't hurt himself in that game. He was missed on a deep pass. He was also missed in the end zone. He could have had a monster result if Washington would have protected Michael Penix Jr. a little bit better, and Michael Penix Jr. would have played a little bit better. Rome Odounze could have gone nuts. But you're talking about a player who had big time production, and he also had that production alongside Jalen Polk and McMillan as well. So Polk and McMillan are both going to get drafted when it comes down to it for the NFL, and I think both of those guys are going to get drafted solidly in round 4 or earlier. Polk might be a round 2 selection, McMillan probably a round 3 or round 4 guy. So he's surrounded by other NFL players and still puts up big time production. That is a great sign. He also displayed his dynamic ability in the open field as a punt returner. Check out the tape of Rome Odounze returning punts. A player of that size and that effective as a punt returner was definitely telling. Now, my number 4 wide receiver in this class is the next low BMI, big-time NFL producer. You've seen it with Tank Dell. You've seen it with Jordan Addison. You've seen it with Devonta Smith. And you're going to see it with Troy Franklin. And Troy Franklin was absolutely dynamite at Oregon. I'm flag planting him at the wide receiver 4. He's 20 years old. He's electric. And he's also an outstanding deep threat. He saw playing time as a freshman at Oregon, and then he broke out big time as a sophomore. And then this year, he exploded. 81 catches, 1,383 receiving yards, and 14 touchdown catches. Over the last, his total touchdown catches at Oregon are 25. And that's the most in Oregon history. You think about how prolific that those Oregon offenses have been over the last 20 years. He has more touchdown receptions than any Oregon Duck ever. And he can be lined up inside, he can be lined outside, or he can be a big speed slot. You're talking about a player who's 6'2" and is going to run somewhere in like that 4.35 to 4.38 range. Again, he's very skinny, but the NFL has showed that that doesn't really matter. And this is a player that can really play well. Now, in terms of draft capital, Troy Franklin is not as insulated as certainly Nabers, Marvin Harrison Jr., or Odounze. But I do think Troy Franklin's going to be drafted inside of the first round. And even if he falls to the back end of the first round, that might be actually the most positive result for him fantasy-wise. Because who's picking at the back end of the first round? The Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. Both of those teams, I think Troy Franklin would fit in perfectly. I think it's also going to be difficult for the Baltimore Ravens to pass up on Troy Franklin at the back end of the first round. So I think he's going to land with an elite quarterback at the back end of the first round, but there's also a chance that somebody takes him from picks like 15 to 25. There's a number of teams in there where he would have a path to being a wide receiver 1 like pretty quickly by year 2 of his career. Some landing spots like Cleveland make sense for Troy Franklin. And my wide receiver 5, I love this player. The most boring name in the draft, but one of the biggest producers. And that's Malik Nabers' teammate at LSU, Brian Thomas. Now, Thomas, it's a funny thing because there is so much hype on Malik Nabers, but Brian Thomas crushed it this year, and you don't hear people talking about him. Like, he's getting some hype from people in fantasy football, but not nearly along the lines of like the other 4 guys we talked about. Between him and Franklin, I think it's a real question for wide receiver 4. That's how good I think Thomas is. He's gaining some steam. But every time I watch any tape on him or start to dive into his athletic traits or production, I keep wanting to move him up every time I update my rankings. He's got a great shot at being the 4th wide receiver selected in the NFL draft. I actually think he will be selected before Troy Franklin by the NFL. He has got the type of profile that NFL teams may value in like the top 15 overall picks. Despite the presence of Nabers, Brian Thomas had 17 touchdown catches, and this mark led the entire country. He's got great size. He's about 6'3". He's going to weigh over 200 pounds, and he can win downfield as a vertical threat. And he's also shifty with the ball in his hands with potential to be a player that gains some yardage after the catch, a yak guy. He has a basketball background, and he was offered D1 scholarships out of high school, but obviously he made the correct choice, and we get to draft him on our fantasy teams. Now, number 6 overall, this one's going to be a little bit polarizing, and some people are not going to like this ranking, but my number 6 overall wide receiver is Keon Coleman. And there's people who are poking holes in Keon Coleman's game, and they're saying, yo, Theo, Keon Coleman, he can't separate, and this guy's going to bust. There's safer wide receivers behind him, but I think Keon Coleman, the NFL teams are going to tell us exactly what they think about him with the draft capital they display for him. Keon Coleman is 20 years old, polarizing prospect in dynasty circles right now. Some people love him, some people don't. But I see him as an outside threat with big-time potential. You're talking about a player who is athletic enough that when he was at Michigan State, he played basketball for Tom Izzo. Transfers to Florida State, and his first game as a Florida State Seminole, he has 3 touchdown catches against LSU in Florida State's huge win. I'm going to take a bullish approach on him. He's only 20 years old. He's got terrific size and physical tools, and I believe that he will be a first-round pick. And if he falls out of the first, he's going to be an early second-round pick. This is a guy who also, like Odounze, is a bigger, stronger player who was used on as a return specialist. And I think when you look like historically that a lot of the players that get to the NFL at wide receiver and they're used on special teams in college have had a lot of great success. So Keon Coleman, I'm going to be a little bit more bullish than some on, and I'm going to go Keon Coleman as my wide receiver 6. Now, if you like big physical wide receivers and you want to ignore my advice on Keon Coleman, this next guy's for you too. It's Adonai Mitchell. And Adonai Mitchell is an exciting player. He's 21 years old, and he continues the trend in this draft class. In years past, we've seen smaller wide receivers who've had great success coming into the league. This is like a throwback class. Big, physical wide receivers who can play on the outside. And Adonai Mitchell, I think, compares favorably to like a T. Higgins-like wide receiver in the NFL. He can be an X wide receiver, big, physical, and athletic. In his only season at Texas, Mitchell led the Longhorns with 11 receiving touchdowns. And one of his touchdown catches was in Texas's college playoff loss to Washington. And that made it, this is like the craziest stat ever. Adonai Mitchell transferred to Texas from Georgia, and he caught a touchdown pass in 3 straight college football playoff games. 2 for Georgia, and this year for Texas. I really like Mitchell, and I think he's going to be a really good value for us in dynasty rookie drafts. I think there's a chance that he falls into the early second, and a couple of the wide receivers I'm talking about behind him get drafted ahead of him. But I want some Adonai Mitchell. I think he's a beast, and I think he can win. And I think certain teams are going to consider him at the end of the first round. A couple of those landing spots that we talked about for Troy Franklin would also be fantastic landing spots for Adonai Mitchell. How about Adonai Mitchell in Kansas City opposite Rashee Rice as an outside threat for Patrick Mahomes and a guy who can win in the red zone when Travis Kelce retires? I would love that landing spot. I mean, pretty much any of these guys with Patrick Mahomes is a nice landing spot. And I don't need to go too far from Adonai Mitchell. I'm going to go right to his college teammate for my next wide receiver, and that's Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy is my wide receiver 8. He makes it back-to-back Texas Longhorns in my rankings. And this could be a little low for Xavier Worthy. I don't want to put like this on him because I don't think that he's going to get drafted quite at that level, but there's a little bit of Jalen Waddle to Xavier Worthy. He makes it back-to-back Texas Longhorns in the rankings. And when you look at what Xavier Worthy did at Texas, he had the 4th most receiving yards in Texas history and the 3rd most touchdown catches in Texas history. He broke out early as a freshman, and he set a Texas freshman record with 981 receiving yards. When you talk about Xavier Worthy, This is a player that has pure speed. He's going to run the 40 in the low 4.3s. He's also a very good route runner, and he's excellent with the ball in his hands. And again, 20 years old. And much like Franklin, Worthy is going to be on the slim side. He's about 175 pounds. I'll be interested to see what he weighs in at the combine. But with his speed and his production, I don't think this is going to be a concern that he's a little bit lighter. And I think much like these other guys, he's going to get drafted in the first round or the mid-second round at his floor. Somewhere in the top 45 picks for Xavier Worthy. More likely than not, he'll be a top 30 pick. Now, my next player is a guy that's rising up quickly because he went to Mobile and he crushed it. And that's Ladd McConkey. And Ladd McConkey is a guy that I'm really bullish on right now. He measured in at 5'11 and 185 pounds at the Senior Bowl. These were excellent measurables for him. There was some concern that he would come in light and a little short. So 5'11, 185 is a win for him. He's an elite route runner, and he broke in as a freshman for a loaded Georgia team. If you start going through like the box scores of like the players that Ladd McConkey played with at Georgia, it's wild. And he was on the field as a freshman. Great hands. He has speed, and he's got yak ability in the open field. Some NFL team could draft McConkey and immediately view him as a difference maker in the slot year one. Like, if he lands correctly to a team that says, you know what, that's my slot. I'm going to go 3 wide out all game. I'm going to put Ladd McConkey in the slot, and we're going to use him in fun ways, and he'll be a safety valve and a guy who can boogie after the catch. And a couple of manufactured runs as well, then I think McConkey could put up big, not like Marvin Harrison Jr. big, but big numbers for where we're drafting him in our rookie drafts. McConkey, based on like the numbers, the strength and numbers of this class, there's going to be a couple wide receivers selected in the second round of rookie drafts. And I think McConkey could be one that lands there and does really, really well. McConkey was used as a returner, and he was very, very good at it. And he also was used on manufactured rushing plays. So at Georgia, McConkey had 200 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. So you're talking about a guy that Georgia, who's produced all these players, George Pickens, James Cook, Brock Bowers this year, the list goes on. This is a team that, despite having all these players around him, they still made sure to get manufactured running plays for Ladd McConkey. He's going to hear his name called on day 1 or early on day 2. Now, my wide receiver 10, it's a tie. I got 3 guys. I'm squeezing them in. What am I going to say? This class has me all hyped. And my I guess we could call this true number 10, go down to 12, but it's technically a tie here. But it's Roman Wilson. And Roman Wilson, I'm probably a little low on because he's steaming up big time. There's a chance that Roman Wilson goes to the NFL Combine and absolutely rips it up. He's already going to run somewhere in the 4.3s. He's got the Xavier Worthy type speed. Roman Wilson was not overly productive at Michigan, but they were a big-time run-heavy offense. And you see all these Michigan Wolverines are going to get drafted this year. They were just loaded this year. J.J. McCarthy is going to be a first-round NFL pick, and he hardly had to pass the ball. But Roman Wilson was their leading receiver, made some big plays in the college football playoffs, had a very, very big play against Alabama and helped them win that game, a very tight game where Michigan had to come from behind. And Roman Wilson goes down to Mobile, and it was like a prove-it week for him. He had some hype going in, but the hype got crazier and crazier and crazier as the week moved on. He was tearing it up. He was unguardable. This is a guy where, much like Ladd McConkey, helped himself down in Mobile, and Roman Wilson, I'm seeing some people that I respect pushing him up to like wide receiver 6 in this class. I'm not there yet. I want to see the draft capital for Roman Wilson, but again, we're going to see him run an elite 40, and there are rumors that Roman Wilson is going to crush the shuttle, like historical numbers for wide receiver shuttle times. There's all these crazy stories about Roman Wilson and his athletic measurables at Michigan. Apparently, he's just tore up their strength and conditioning program like legendary setting records type metrics. And then there's some very cool stories about Roman Wilson, 14 years old, had to get on a plane to travel for high school every morning. So you get to the airport at like 4 a.m, get on a plane so he could play at a better high school football program. He's a Hawaiian native. So, he grew up in Maui, had to fly to Honolulu. That's wild. So he's got that dog. He's got that determination, and he's going to potentially have that draft capital. Where will he get drafted? I don't see Roman Wilson going in the first round. I know there's some people talking about him getting drafted in the back end of the first round. And certainly if he rips up the combine, that could happen. But I think based on the strength of this class, he's probably going to be a second round pick, which is still really, really good for him. And again, I have him at wide receiver 10. And tied for wide receiver 10, well, we could call him wide receiver 11 if we want to get into it like that. It's Malachi Corley. And Malachi Corley is another player who really helped himself down in Mobile. 21 years old. And this is a guy who, if you saw him and didn't know what position he played, you would probably guess that he is a running back. He's 5'10", 215 pounds, and he projects to be a wide receiver that can be used on designed running plays at the next level. There are some people whispering the name Deebo Samuel as like an upside comparison for him. He led the nation in yak yards last year with nearly 500 yards, and he was even better in 2022. People called him the Yak King, Western Kentucky player. So not a whole lot of players come out of Conference USA and make big impactful impacts at the NFL level. There's some concern about his ADOT. His average depth of target was incredibly low, but that was sort of the offense that he was in, where they were looking to get him manufactured touches around the line of scrimmage and let him use his yak. And he crushed it in that role. He forced 69 missed tackles during his college career, which is wild. And there's missed tackles by like shifty dudes in the open field, and that's cool. But Malachi Corley would also have these broken tackles where somebody tried to tackle him, and he basically puts his shoulder into him and goes through him. He gets those sort of missed tackles too. So like Malachi Corley, if he lands well, this is a player where I think he needs to land on a team that's willing to get him the manufactured touches, willing to get him the ball around the line of scrimmage, and willing to like accentuate his strengths. I think he's done enough that I think he's going to be a second round pick or early third round pick. I also think he's going to run well athletically. There are some Western Kentucky people who say he is a low 4.3 guy. So when you start talking about the speed score, like his weight adjusted speed is going to be very impressive if he can get into the 4.3s at 215 pounds. And now my number tied for 10, or we'll call him my number 12 wide receiver, lost a little steam. I think, and this is a guy where I had him a little bit higher, but I've had to adjust him, put him behind guys like McConkey, put him behind guys like Roman Wilson, certainly, and behind Malachi Corley. And that's Xavier Legette. And Xavier Legette is about as polarizing as it gets. He's the oldest wide receiver that I'm discussing here. So he's like 3 years older than a guy like Malik Nabers or Keon Coleman. He's a fantasy litmus test. Some see him as a player to avoid because he's an older prospect. And a lot of people are scared off by the fact that he broke out during his 5th season in college. Others see him as a late bloomer with outstanding athleticism and big-time production, even albeit a one year at South Carolina. Was a little disappointing to see Xavier Legette measure in at 6'1" at the Senior Bowl, because a lot of people thought he was going to be 6'3". Nevertheless, what Legette did in the SEC this past season cannot be ignored. He caught 71 passes for 1,250 yards and 7 touchdown grabs. He's also expected to run well at the combine. So, for what it is, Xavier Legette, we're still keeping an eye on him, but I think that the chances of him being a first-round pick went way down with that, with him being a little shorter and also not having the greatest week in Mobile. So this was awesome. I'm going to give you, just to round it up, my overall top 10 is at 1, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, Rome Odounze, Troy Franklin, Brian Thomas, Keon Coleman, then back-to-back Texas Longhorns with Adonai Mitchell and Xavier Worthy, Lad McConkey at wide receiver 9, and then Roman Wilson, Malachi Corley, and Xavier Legette tied at 10. A couple other players for you to keep an eye on. We're talking about Tez Walker from UNC. Not a great Senior Bowl week, but I think he could have the draft capital. Jalen Polk from Washington. Malik Washington from Virginia. Probably going to be pushed down a little bit, but a guy who was extremely productive. Jacob Cowing, Arizona. Small, but again, like Malik Washington, incredibly productive in college. Javon Baker, who could go on, I could have put Javon Baker in this list. Jalen McMillan from Washington. Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son, probably a 4th-round pick, 5th-round pick. Ricky Pearsall from Florida, very good Senior Bowl week for him. And Johnny Wilson, a big-time sleeper because he's huge and athletic and fast. Not like a big-time outlier with everything. So, again, check out the article version of this video at playerprofiler.com. Look for more videos like this all throughout the process. I'm Theo Gremminger. I got you covered for everything you need to know in redraft, dynasty, and we got you covered at Player Profiler. Let's get it.